Hello everyone, this is Professor Keen once again. Welcome back to my Introduction to Astronomy course, Physics 101. In my first few lectures for this course, we talked about the software package Stellarium. Now, in the last lecture, we began talking about a book that was written by Tom Van Damme and David Harriman called The Stars from the Falling Apple Science Institute. This is a much more rudimentary book than what will be presented to you or what's contained in the Stellarium software, which is very sophisticated. But by rudimentary, I don't mean bad. I mean actually very good, especially for introducing students to astronomy. This book is excellent in my view because it provides a simple way of orienting yourself with respect to the night sky. In my last lecture, what I did is I talked about the 4 guidepost constellations: Orion, the Big Dipper, Cygnus the Swan, and Cassiopeia, that occupy different quadrants of the sky. Once again, what I'm going to be doing in this lecture is reading through selections from this book. And again, the disclaimer goes to both Mr. Van Damme and Mr. Harriman, who have kindly provided me with these materials. If you're unhappy with me putting this on my video, I'd be happy to take it down. But and for those of you who really enjoy this book, I would highly recommend that you take a look at some of their other books that approach science from an inductive way, that is, from looking at nature and trying to understand how she works. Okay, so let's look at when and where to find the guidepost constellations. We know 2 things about the stars: what the guidepost constellations look like and what order they travel in. Anytime we see stars, we can find one of our guidepost constellations and know where the others must be. The next step then is to know in advance which guidepost is going to be out at any given time. That way, you'll know where to look for the stars that you want to, and you'll have a whole new confidence in your stargazing skills. It's easier than you think to gain this kind of mastery of the sky. After this chapter, you'll know what stars are out anytime, day or night, clear or cloudy, without even going outside. The key is knowing where the sun is on our giant wheel, so to speak, spinning in the sky. The sun controls day and night, so it determines which stars we will see at any given time. Let's see how the sun fits into our model, and we'll again begin with Orion. When Orion is high overhead on dark, cloudless nights, he dominates the sky. But Orion is only the king at night. During the day, there's an even more powerful ruler of the sky, the sun. The sun rises in the morning, causing the whole sky to light up and obscuring all the stars from view. They're still there, slowly turning on their giant wheel. Orion still chases the queen still chases the swan still wants a drink, and the dipper still wants to put Orion in his place with a good dousing. But with the daytime skies so bright, you simply can't see them. The key to being a master stargazer is to know what part of the star wheel lines up with the sun at any given time. Fortunately, this is very easy to do. The sun and the stars move across the sky at almost the same speed. So when the sun rises near Orion, it stays near Orion all day long and all through the night until another morning comes. You can never see Orion when he is near the sun. And I'll make an editorial comment here. In these diagrams, Van Damme and Harriman are showing the sun right in front of Orion. This is a bit of an oversimplification. As we talked about in the Stellarium software, the sun passes through the 12 signs of the zodiac. But some of the signs of the zodiac, namely Taurus and Gemini, are near Orion. So what he's really saying here is when the sun is near Orion in the sky, that's when you cannot see Orion because the light of the sun overcomes the light of those stars. Of course, Orion is not always near the sun. You can easily see that for yourself every year around Christmas time. At the end of December, Orion is nowhere near the sun. In fact, he is on the opposite side of the sky from the sun. At the start of winter, you can see Orion rising just after sunset. But 3 months later, in the spring, Orion has already crossed most of the sky by sunset. He happens to be catching up to the sun. In fact, Orion does catch up to the sun. By the beginning of summer, you can no longer see Orion at all because he travels across the sky with the sun. By autumn, Orion has passed the sun and is out ahead of it. At this time of year, you can see Orion if you get up early, before sunrise. Orion keeps moving relative to the sun, but he always ends up in the same place in any given season. In winter, Orion is always opposite the sun. In spring, Orion always follows the sun by 1/4 of a turn. In summer, Orion is always hidden by the sun. In autumn, Orion always leads the sun by 1/4 of a turn. Rather than trying to remember where Orion is during each season, it is easier to just remember when he is by the sun and how fast he catches the sun. How fast does Orion catch up to the sun? Well, since Orion is the same distance from the sun every year on any given day, for example, he's opposite the sun on Christmas, we know that Orion catches up to and passes the sun exactly once every year. That means Orion catches the sun by 1/4 of a turn each of the 4 seasons, or 1/4 of a turn every 3 months. So, when is Orion by the sun? Well, since we can't see Orion when he's by the sun, we have to do a little detective work to find out when he is there. One way to find Orion's position relative to the sun is to notice what day Orion is at his highest point at midnight. At midnight, we can imagine the sun is straight down, halfway between setting and rising. If Orion is straight up at this time, he must be directly opposite the sun. This occurs every year on December 21st. Since Orion laps the sun, so to speak, once per year, it will take him 1/2 of a year to catch the sun starting from halfway around. Half a year from December 21 is June 21, so Orion must be by the sun on June 21. Another way is to notice the last day that you can see Orion after sunset, before he gets too close to the sun to be able to see. This will be around May 21st. Then notice the first day that you can see Orion rising before sunrise. This will be around July 21st. Halfway between these dates is June 21st. That's the day that Orion is directly behind the sun. Orion is directly behind the sun every year on June 21st. Coincidentally, this also happens to be the longest day of the year, which is the first day of summer. Now that we know when Orion is by the sun and how much faster he moves than the sun, we can calculate where Orion is compared to the sun for any day of the year. And once again, I want to remind you that the sun is not going to be directly in front of Orion, but it will be in the same vicinity of the sky as Orion, and that's why you cannot see Orion on June 21st. Now let's ask a couple questions, just to give you a bit of a test. How far ahead of the sun is Orion on Halloween? That is October 31st. That's my first question. And the second question is, how about on Valentine's Day? That is February 14th. Let's look at the answer to the question about Halloween, October 31st. October 31st is a little bit more than 4 months after June 21. So Orion must be a little more than 4/12, or about 1/3 of a turn ahead of the sun. What about on Valentine's Day, February 14th? Well, February 14th is a little more than 4 months before June 21. So Orion must be a little more than 4/12, that is 1/3, of a turn from catching the sun from behind. If you know where Orion is, and you know the order of the guidepost constellations, then you know where the other guidepost constellations must be. Assume you know that Orion is overhead at noon. Then you know the Big Dipper must be rising. The Dipper is always 1/4 of a turn behind the Hunter. Remember, he wants to douse Orion. The Swan is always just about opposite Orion. Cassiopeia, just out of reach ahead of Orion, must be setting. It's good practice to point out the constellations every time you go outside, whether you can see them or not.